So now let's have a look at the actual letter forms themselves and start thinking a little bit about what those shapes might communicate. So this is from Stop Stealing Sheep, which is by Eric Speakerman, and it's kind of a famous piece on typography. And so he says there are 7 deadly sins, 7 seas, and 7 sons of 7 sons, but thousands of typefaces. Someone had to come up with a system to classify them, since describing how different type designs express different emotions just isn't exact enough. So here we can see some of the ways that people talk about fonts. And as you can see on the left-hand side, again, you could broadly group most of these, the top kind of everything but the bottom one there, as serifs. And you can see that in terms of slab serif, and then you've got a sans serif. And then you have kind of ones that are more scripty, black letter, that refers back to German black letter, kind of the original kind of calligraphic fonts. You get things like symbols and dingbats. Display fonts are ones that aren't going to be very good for setting large amounts of body text. And we talked about the fact that when you set in all caps, it's hard for people to read. And again, things like scripts. So there are lots of different ways that you can talk about serif fonts. As you can tell, there's so many different kinds. But we're going to kind of talk at like a top level in terms of just serif, sans serif, and then things like display fonts. But you can see here that there are large variations even within serif fonts. As you can see, it doesn't give a complete overview of the available choices of fonts. But there are a few basic principles, and there's hundreds of ways of designing typefaces. So we can kind of think about what different ways of combining these things kind of can give different meanings. So when we look at the serifs here, some of them look more old style than others. Some of them look like things that have a classicism to them, versus the slab serif, for example, looks more contemporary. It has more of, say, mechanical feel to it, where when you look at something like the Saban, the second one down, the thicks and thins are very pronounced in terms of there's a lot of contrast between the thickness and the thinness and the strokes, and that tends to look more classic to us. We think about the typeface for Vogue magazine, for example, has really, really pronounced thicks and thins, so we have an association with this style as being classic, but also with high fashion. So we can think about, especially with display fonts, how we can play with these letter forms as a way to evoke emotion and feeling, like we're going to be doing in our motif type piece. So, for example, this poster here on the right-hand side, Everybody Dance Now, it talks about the kind of, you can see the energy coming through the different letter forms. So we can have fun, we can look at things that maybe aren't going to be suitable for setting large amounts of body text, but if you're setting something really large, a headline, a single word, you can really play with the form and have that shape that makes up the letter evoke a lot of meaning and emotion. You can see here we can mix things freely when the communication goal is less focused on readability and more on energy and feeling. Now, it can sometimes then be a little bit hard to read, so you need to make sure that you're clear about the intention. So if this was a cover of a magazine and it just stood like this, it might be hard to tell what the name of the magazine was. Some of these letters are clearer to understand than others. I would say the top line, the SMO, that's pretty clear. And it gets a little bit more abstract as you go down. Now, one of the things that helps is that, for example, this wasn't seen just on its own, but in fact had this text on that red blocked out area. And so when you see that the name of this particular magazine is Smoke Signal, suddenly you can read all the letters a lot more clearly. So understanding the context that your design is going to be seen in can oftentimes help you. And then this is by a great designer, and this is actually a typeface that has all of these little calligraphic pieces in it. So it says, "Show some restraint there, girl. Your careless heart breaks after time." And so you can see that she's really played with the intersection of things, but also everything's tied together through these little like flourishes. And so we can see you can use bits of type as imagery as well. So how are you going to choose a typeface? That's our next set of slides.